Yes, and there we are again with a new episode of Dance Jams. Today we are going to talk about form, shape, and design in dance and why those three words and what the differences are, or maybe it's similarities. Who knows? But we'll find it out soon enough when we talk about this with my good friend and colleague Ton Greten, of course. Ton, are you there?
I'm there, Sean, and again, a nice subject. That's what I think. So,
Yes, well, it's a subject that we definitely have put in your book about gem. And so, yeah, personally, I think it's a great subject. But of course, as always, these are personal opinions. And let's see
mm,
what it is. Is there a difference between form, shape, and design, and then specifically in dance? But we'll also explore it maybe in other things in society or in art. Form, shape, and design in dance. So let me ask you a question first about three words and the meaning of it, Ton. Do you know where those three words are coming from?
oh yeah, of course, Sean.
I know you
Uh,
do, but I pretend that I asked the question. Yeah.
and form, forma, figura comes from the Latin and means the outside of it. And shape is a pure English word. But going back to form, forma, it's also the oldest word from the three. And it is used in many countries, also in English, but they use for dance more shape. But we will explain it later why this happened. And shape is it's old German also, and the English have adapted, and it was around 1500, something like that. And then we have design, and that's also an old French Greece word. So this is where the wording coming from, and design is the youngest one of the three wordings. And but all three we use in our dancing. Maybe form the most less in England or in America or in English speaking languages, but all three we use.
That we do. That we do.
Mhm.
In English, I hear probably the most used word is shape and design. If I hear it in the English word, but in other languages, actually, the word shape is not even translated. Doesn't actually not exist in the way we do it in English, or maybe it does exist, but it is typically gets then into form. So in the Dutch
Mhm.
language, if strangely enough, those two come together. But we hear dance teachers using the word shape a lot, where you and I start to use the word form a little bit more. Is
Mhm.
there what is there what is the reason for that, Tom?
Because form I use because first of all I look what is the common things in all the dance forms, and this would be a certain person has a certain figure, posture, and the steps we learn have a certain form of it. Not formula, also, you could see it like that, but they have a certain form. Um, I don't know if they in England or in America say they have a particular shape, the steps. I don't know in that one, but for me it was quite logical to do form because form comes from the Latin. I use it also in my book Dynamic, and I use expression. And dynamic is dynamica, and expression is expressiona.
Yeah.
And all three comes from the Latin, and I want to keep them together. Also, form is a three-dimensional form, like in the architect world. And if you look to shape, it's two-dimensional. So both have difference. And also, I use Shape, very seldom because it's too flat for me, but also we use it only in the English countries, our English language. And when we look to the most of the countries, like in Greece or Italy or Romania or Germany or Netherlands or Denmark, etc., we use forma, figura. So I want to keep it together in the language. So I didn't want to take a strange word in it, like shape, but it's not strange in the dancing world. So that's a common used word.
Yeah. So I think that's at least my opinion. It's kind of nice because in the beginning I was also thinking, Tom, yeah, why is that so important? Well, in when we just normally talk about things, it's maybe not that important, but when it becomes important, is that we can using those three words, we can make a distinction between the three. So if we specifically wants to make about only a 2D outline, now we can say shape. If we want to take about a more 3D outline, then now we can say form. And the better we have defined our words when we teach and learn, actually the easier it become, because now with our students can say, hey, make more a shape, make more a form. But and so I think that's an interesting one. Design is even more confusing, but because people use it for all kind of things. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But that's the reason why we use that form and shape. Now, I only actually, when I make that distinction, I only have a little bit, well, I don't want to say resistance, but I noticed that my English speaking students have a little bit a harder time to adopt the word form. I hear that the people who actually have the word form already in the language have not so much problem making that distinction. Now, as long as I know it, I can still teach it, of course. It's not to say, oh, it has to be that. That's not the point of what Ton and I try to do here. Ton specifically just found those differences in the meaning, and we just don't want to blur it so that we can use the three words in it, which I think is the most beautiful. Well, it's a beautiful thing. I was trying now to talk in superlatives, but we typically try not to do that. But I think it's a great thing that Chim tried to do is make specific definitions and meaning to words. So to be very precise, and that helps in dancing. I always think, Ton, to that they know what I say a word that my students or our students they now know. Ah, that's what you mean. Yeah, that
Mhm.
they have the same understanding of the words, right?
Yes.
You also, I don't know if you mentioned it, but shape also comes from an old English word, skip.
Yeah, ski.
It's skip,
Correct.
and actually it comes and that's language knowledge, but it actually, if you go even further, then it comes from the word scape, and which also will allude to that two-dimensional form. So it is actually really an English word from an etymology point of view, right? Where design comes from the word designare, which is Greek. So
Yes, Greek. Yes,
that's
Greek and Old German.
well, no, design is coming from Greek, not shape, and
Okay.
form is more Latin and Greek,
La,
forma.
yeah, forma
Uh,
figura. Yes, but I had four reasons, Sean,
hmm
to
Yeah.
take form. I said them already, but I will put them chronological to it. The first one is it's the oldest word. It's
hmm
from the first century. The second reason is I want to keep all words together in the Latin, like dynamica, also the personality, persona, I think was that, and expressiona. And I keep the language together. That was my second reason. My third reason is in the art world, they use form. And form means it's three dimensional. So I have four reasons to take form. But of course, when you are using in your way shape, that's okay. So, but I did it for myself to keep it all together and find
Yeah.
a reason not to take a strange word in it. Shape is form is from the first century. Shape is from the fifth century, and design is from the 16th century. So it's you can see that there are differences in how
Ah,
language are developed through the centuries, through the years. It change. It is evolving. It's yeah. That's the beauty of it. And what you think, Sean, now from form, because you use it also now.
yeah, I use it, of course. If I talk to my own language, I used form, of course. My own language is Dutch, so the word form is absolutely neat, not strange, right? That is logic, but strangely enough, specifically in the Netherlands, we are so used to use English words in our language, right? We are, the average Dutch person is not that so precise in the language. We just, we take German words and we take English words, and if you listen to, this is maybe a little bit outside the context, but if you listen to how Belgian people speak Dutch, they speak Dutch too, right? They are often more precise in keeping the real English, the real Dutch word. So I was already used to it, but most of my dance teaching or was in English. Even from a Dutch teacher, it was still in English because there was just a time. So the word shape came in very quickly. But I had a couple of questions also around those words because we didn't talk about it in the Dutch episode, Ton, but we have a term in Latin and ballroom dancing, and we call it figures. And it always confused me, that word figures, the way they used it in the book that we use to learn ballroom and Latin dancing. And so I point that out specific because this topic can go across all kind of dances, by the way. It's nothing to do only with ballroom and Latin, but it always confuses it. So what is the figures? And so I asked them, has it maybe something to do with the thing that you kind of can draw on the floor when people make that figure, which I
Yes, the
discovered later that that's actually why they started to call it figure. But I heard so many different explanations of it on.
figure. It's figura.
It's come from figura. So before we met, I started to already ask big questions. Why do you use that word if you don't know exactly where it's coming from?
It's also in English
Figure,
or only
yeah.
in Dutch.
No, it's
Figuren
also
or figure?
figures. We call it figures, right? Yeah,
No,
yeah,
really, I didn't know, Sean.
yeah. So,
Uh,
yeah, so it's so you have steps and you have figures, right?
Wow.
So that
Yes.
is that is kind of strange actually if you think about it. But if you then go back to the mind of the teachers in those time, they were always trying to take a pattern on the floor, which makes in that sense the word figure, which is closely connected to form and in English shape. So that's where that was coming from, and I had those questions, and some people said, I don't know. Yeah, I don't, and that's okay. By the way, I also don't know not everything. I think the more I know, the more I discover that I know less. But that's a different thing. But that's how Ton and I also met with this crazy obsession about trying to use one word for the one thing so that it becomes a little bit, at least for ourselves, clear. So
Yes.
we
Oh,
had that connection even before we knew that we had that connection.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm very surprised, Sean. Yes, I know for me it was a common thing to use figures,
Hmm.
figuren in Dutch.
In Dutch.
So it sounds a little bit the same.
Yeah.
And but I didn't know they call it figures. And figures are actually the steps on the floor. And
Yeah.
still, they start to print the steps and make the footprint on the floor, and
Exactly.
you could follow that. And from there, they did it with words
Yeah.
later, and actually they had a particular form
Yeah.
because figures comes from the Latin word figura, and
Figura.
figura it's like a brother sister from form,
From yeah.
forma.
So
Wow.
that's where I saw that. But that also immediately put the question to in my mind, but there are so many more forms and shapes and whatever word you want to use than just the pattern on the floor. That in my mind. And that's what so that was one question that I had. And the second question that I had that I said to one of my teachers, but that's not correct because it's only a
Okay.
figure if everything would stay there, but I move away, so I'm at a different point on the floor. No, 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 you don't get it. You start at point A and then you go to point B, and I said, no, I used the word trace then. That is what you trace on the floor. You and I are now calling that pathway, right? But that's a trace on the floor. It's not visible there anymore. That is that is not really there. It is just in your mind still there, which is great. And later, with when I started, with my other teacher that I stayed the longest with, he started to use those words too. That you trace and leave it behind, and and said, no, that's the figure you make on the floor. So I had those questions already, Tom. But yeah, that's the word figura and figure started to make sense for me. Shape and form that came when I met you. The difference between shape and form. I just intertwined those, you know. I didn't care so much about it. But with the word figura and figure I had a lot of difficulties how some people defined it. So
Hmm.
I think it's great, Ton, that you do that in your book. And then, so this is slightly different then, but you can help me here. Then I came to the Paso Doble. And the Paso Doble, people said, and the Paso Doble is all about design.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's what I
That's
said.
a
Is that
strange.
okay? He said, "Oh, okay, that's interesting." And I took that, of course, because they were my students. Look, I understand that you make all these designs in it's more about going from here and going from there. People cannot see that who are listening to it, but I was making some forms more than designs, to be honest, in what we say now. And so I started to understand how the context from which they were thinking, and then it's fine. I was not
Yeah,
there to be
absolutely.
smarter or something. I just always, and hope listeners see that, and that's what Tom does a lot. He always says, let's look first at the context how we use these words, and then it's fine. When I understood what they were trying to say, I noticed that I started to use that word design too. Now, of course, I use it slightly different, but at that time I fully understood what they meant with design. But that's when I would think, but does that then mean that the other dances don't have design? you know,
Mhm,
those were
mhm.
my questions. Uh, yeah,
So,
and so they
Sean,
said no, there's more emphasis, and I said no. Actually with you, Ton, I said no, there is actually not. Design is a whole different word.
so Paso Doble is an old dance form. You
Yep.
would not say it's an old dance shape.
Nope. Yeah, that's nice, Tom. Hey, we didn't bring that in. That's a good one. It's an old
Oh,
dance form. Yeah, it's an old
yeah,
style of dancing. You would never
yeah.
say it's an old
Old,
shape of dancing. Yeah. Hey, that's
it's not an old. It's not
design.
an
It's
old.
also not an old dance
No,
design.
no, no.
No
It's an old dance form instead of an old dance design or an old dance shape.
shape.
That would be quite strange. So it's an old
Strange.
dance form from the 15th century, and it means two steps actually.
Yeah, it just means two steps, not any
Paso
more
doble, doble is
complicated.
two, and a paso is
Two
steps.
steps. Yeah, I always make a joke in Texas, Tom,
Yes.
because in Texas they dance country dance, and the most taught country dance in Texas is a two step, and then
Yeah.
and you also have a double two step. So and then I always ask them, why don't you call that a four step? Yeah, I'm just joking with my dance teachers, but I also say, man, we're teaching the two-step way before your country people even think there was. Even before the United States, we already were teaching the two-step. They said, no, that's impossible. I said, yes, we call it the paso doble.
Okay, we can go to the form and
Yes,
explain a little bit about the form.
yes,
We can use it in several ways, like the paso doble is an old form, but we can use it also for the figure of a person. I have a particular form, Sean has a particular form, and from the form of my face, you can recognize me. You could say it in English in shape, but we keep it by form now, and we told also why, because it's three-dimensional. So when it would be a flat picture, what it is, because the whole world is three-dimensional, and the other first dimensional and second is, or the first of dimension is a theoretical model. Sean explained that already in an earlier podcast.
yeah,
And I learned also particular steps, figura, figures, and the steps. And the steps are the figures. So I learned a particular form, like a cha cha cha, forward, backward, cha cha cha. So the music and the dance style are the same form. And you wouldn't say the music is has the same shape. That would be also very strange. So we find another reason, Sean, why to put it more in form. But form was so interesting because I use it for the proprioception in the 10 body parts. Proprioception, if you not listen to our earlier podcast, proprio means your own property, proprius, and ception is the perceiving of that own property from that body. And we put it in 10 body parts. And these 10 body parts can bend, stretch, or rotate. Or you can call it also bending, extending, and rotating. What doesn't matter? What matters is if I have a straight finger and I bend it, then it gets a different form. And this is how I use it in bending, stretching, rotating. So one body part, what change in bending, stretching, or rotating, you already change the form. And change means also it gets dynamically when it's constant, in my opinion. But anyway, shape I don't use. I used it before, but it's in my system. And if people use it, it's fine for me. And how you understand form, Sean, for yourself now after you
yeah.
are again.
After I jam, and maybe a little bit before jam already with all my strange questions. Well, I mean, if you, it's hard to see is that if I make the same, bended finger, right? So these were the things that I was thinking about. That's only because you have this one perspective, and you could say shape. But then then I just turned my finger, and now you look at from the other side, and then you would say, but it has now a different shape. Now, from a two-dimensional point of view, that would be correct, but it's still exactly the same form, right? Does that make
Yes,
sense? And that's why I started to embrace your wording, because I didn't change the form, neither did I change because but you see a different shape because you look at it from a two-dimensional perspective. But I kept the same form. People cannot see it, but make a form with your hand and look at from different side, then you get a different two-dimensional perspective, but the form in itself has not changed. So that's why I thought, like, okay, that is actually brilliant, Tom, to see it in that way. And I struggled when I was teaching with these things how to explain that, right? But now that I use these two words more consistently, it was actually super clear. When you look at it from the front and side, you think that I changed the shape. That's absolutely not true, right? You see a different shape because you see it two dimensional, specifically if you do it in front of a camera. But you can clearly see that I did not change the form of my hand. No matter how I turn it, I did not change the form of it, which is a very, very mathematical way of looking at things, which you and I sometimes do. Though that's why I do it. Now, of course, in English, there's also a verb. Shape is also a verb, right? Which means
Mhm,
if you look it
mhm.
up in that makes it all very confusing, guys. But if you can try to do what I just did in front of a mirror, point with your finger to the mirror and look at it from the front, right? Then you see like a little dot. But if you look at the same finger and don't change the form of your hand, you look at the side, yeah, you see a different shape, and that is from a two-dimensional perspective, absolutely correct. But do you ask yourself, did you change the form of your hand? And if you then use the same word, it becomes very confusing. So now I use two different words, and it becomes actually very clear. Does that help, Tom?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
And in the English language, we use it for more the
yeah,
position of the body, how it is in space and time,
yeah,
the outline of the dancer.
yeah,
But the outline of the dancer, I call it more the figure.
yeah. You could see it like that. Did your microphone change, Tom?
No, not at all, Sean. You
No?
hear
Okay.
something different?
Yeah, a little bit, but okay. It's a live broadcast. Well, it's we don't broadcast it live, people, but
Yes, yes,
we
yes.
record it live without any changing it in it towards that word again. All right. What about the word design? If we can put that in the mix, Ton.
Design, yeah, design. It's more wider and deeper. Also, it has so many elements in it. Design, it's actually everything together where form and shape are in it, but also dynamic in it, expression in it, how you use dynamic and expression. All these things are in design, and design is for a particular time period also. And it is how I could tell that it is less, it's more for a particular time period, and it's coming and it's going. So when we look into the 30s or the 50s of 100 years ago, or 2000, around 2000, our clothing are different, our behavior is different, our everything changed, our form. When you look to the figures of the people from the 50s and you look to the figures how they look now, we get more and more heavier, and that is a fact. And because the food is different, and yeah, that's completely different. I get all these messages here, and you cannot hear it, but get beep, 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 beep.
No,
So
I
I
can
close
I
it
can
here.
hear it too.
Oh, okay.
I
I
can hear it
close this
too. I
program.
can hear it too. Yeah,
Yeah.
design the way we actually, when we all bring all the components together that we have described in the jam method, then we make a design of a dance. So it's not only the choreography, it's not so we design and put the things more together, and that is a very conscious effort. And I say that on purpose, Tom, because in English, in the word designate, there is 100% the word designing. So we don't have to do it in Dutch because this is not a Dutch episode, but we use more components than only the form of a dancer. We also look at the light, we use at the choreography, we use at expression, and call that the design of a piece of movement
Mhm.
or dance or
Yes.
dance you know
It,
Even if we
it's
say
more,
dance, we don't only talk about shape. Dance is that encompasses everything.
Yeah.
And this is
It's
what you
more.
and I discovered is that
Yes.
a lot of people forget a lot, not on purpose, but because when you mention it, they say, "Oh yes," they forget often a lot of elements that influences the dance. That could be the temperature of the room, that could be the space, the space of the room. It could be the light. It could be what you are wearing. Right? Everything influences the dance. And if you put that all together in a more conscious way, Ton and I like to call that we design the movement or the dance at that moment. So that's how we
The,
use the word design. If I use your own terms, we just say very easy. We encompass form, expression, and dynamic, and arrange it and execute it in such a way that it actually comes together in a way that supports the personality that you want to put in your dance. So I used all the
it's
four letters
yeah,
of your
yeah.
method.
Design is more comprehensive, you could say. So it had all the words, form, dynamic already in it. So then we speak about a visual composition from that person, and you could also say a particular style, but you could also say a particular design.
Yeah,
And that
yeah,
is the visual composition of that person.
yeah.
And yeah,
That's right.
interesting if you see it like that. So I know one of the associations of competition dancing in ballroom and Latin, they
Hmm.
use the WDSF, they use hip design and foot design.
Yeah,
But
interesting.
yeah, very interesting. And I know what they mean with it. But actually, I want to ask them what they mean with it because they didn't give context to it. They
Hmm.
call it because it sounds fancy. But if I try to find the, how I say, the context of it and the story behind it, I couldn't find it till now.
Yeah,
Yet
yeah.
I
In
couldn't
in
find it.
our in our mind, you cannot change the design of your hip unless you go to the surgery, and then you could change the design of your hip. But that's the context. That's because that's the way we use it. We you can make different forms with your, well, then it's maybe a different thing. But so that's a little bit how we try to do it, and not to be smarter than other people, not at all. If we understand the contents, the problem that I have with that, Tom, is if you use it slightly different, but try to use it then consistently from the same context, then it's easy. But that's what we often discovered with those words, that it is then not consistently used in the same way, and then it becomes more confusing. So that's actually always a little bit my problem. I'm a writer myself, by the way, and I know how hard that is, by the way, to do that. It asks a little bit of effort to do that. So, by no means, if you come across our writings and we are not consistent in the way we do it, just by all means, feel free also to point it out to us, because it's all about trying clarity. And Ton says this always correctly: give first context behind what you want to say. And can I introduce a new topic for that, Ton?
Ah, yes,
Yeah,
absolutely, Sean.
because that is something that is very close to our heart. What would you say? Is it form before? Is it form before function, or is it function before form? Why do I ask this question? Maybe you can also give a little bit of context behind that question, but that has a lot to do with
Yes.
dance.
Yes. In the 20th century,
Yeah,
we had Bauhaus.
yeah,
And Bauhaus, it's not that you build a house. Yes, that's how the German also do that. Work building a house, but it's actually an art school what they grounded there more than 100 years ago, and they use the same colors also, blue, yellow, and red. I use it in a different way. I use it in blue, red, yellow. There's also a difference in it how you use it. But anyway, Bauhaus, That's how you say, not a company. Wait, I have to put an art form from dance, from painting, from photography, from the architect world, and they build a school there in Weimar, and
Maria.
we get we get now a big museum in Berlin now. I hope they are already building it for 4 or 5 years, that it will be finished next year, 25, end of 25 or in 26. And this is the first thing where we want to go to. But it comes from there, from Bauhaus. You mean what was the question again, Sean?
We were talking about form and function.
Yeah, form and function, yes. And they introduced form, follow, function. And that was quite strange for me, because there are many teachers in our world, ballroom world, and Latin world, they use form, follow, function.
Yeah,
But can you imagine when form would follow function, then we would have only one chair,
yeah.
or one house, or one speaker, or one phone. That's not true. But the Bauhaus is actually in the iPhones, because I take the idea of Bauhaus in a geometric way, and also the Brown calculator in it. It's also follow the ball less, how you say, design in it, different. They work with straight lines and keep it so simple as possible, so minimalistic possible. And our world would be boring if a form would follow function. Of course, I understand it, but I would not say that. You could also not say dynamic follow function or expression follow function. No, very strange,
Well,
in my opinion.
it's still in, at least you see it in the ballroom dance world and in the classical ballet. You
Yeah,
hear that
absolutely.
always. You always
Yes.
hear, it's function for first and in form. But, I think we need to think deeply about what Ton just said, because if there is then an absolute function, right, then that would mean that every form would gravitate to that function. And that means in the ultimate form, there would be just one form left, because that's the only possibility that you can have. So, and that comes to, I know where it's coming from, but then you can ask yourself, where is the art in that? Art has more freedom. And I do understand definitely that you can teach about that the form sometimes follow the function. But if you make that the goal, then we would become all the same, which you see a little bit in the phone, right? Because 90% of the phones, if you look at it from a distance, I'm holding up my iPhone now, you cannot see the difference from far away between an iPhone and a Samsung
Something. Yeah.
or whatever you have, a UI or whatever that is. So Samsung is going mostly a little bit the furthest in trying to change the the form, just to differentiate themselves, like a folding phone or something like that. But they reason also a little bit from the function there. If dance is an art, which everyone can make their own opinion about that, right? But I believe it is, right? Then I rather be led by the form. That's
Yes.
that's that. That's it. And
Yeah.
we have to understand as dancers both sides. By the way, it's not like saying, "Oh no, that's completely ridiculous." Not at all. We just start to think about these things, and we heard it over and over again. This is also where we met, but before we knew each other, Ton, is when teachers stay saying to us, function before form. I said, but a moment ago you said you have to give it your own interpretation. How is that possible? Huh?
Mm.
How can those two be aligned if that is true? So
Mhm.
yeah,
I had a nice quote when you
yeah,
was speaking pop up in my head.
hmm,
The diversity makes the difference, but the
yeah,
difference makes also the diversity,
yeah,
vice vice
yeah,
versa.
Yeah.
And if the diversity in forms, but also the difference in it, makes it exciting.
Yeah.
And but still, it is always a choice. There is no good and wrong in it. It's just what you feel, what you think, what is close to you. So both you can use for it. But when somebody
Yeah.
say function follows the form, or vice versa, what it also is, yeah. But I believe more in the diversity and in the change of it, what gives dynamic. But
Well,
if you use it for one building, of course, that makes the difference. If you use it for a chair, that makes the difference.
yeah, if it's function for form, then you would see all the same types of chairs. If it's a stool for a bar, then all bar stools would be exactly the same. The other thing that I think about form and function is that Don had to go away for a second. You know, it happened to me in the past too. So I'll keep talking and so pretending that he is still there. Yes. So we're talking about form and function. Form is, that could be any free form that you pick in and then adjust your movements towards it. But in some dense styles and forms, they say it's function first. So they say, if you want to make a certain turn, you can only take one form. And they typically also use shape, by the way. But in that sentence, they use function before form, even in English. They don't say
Mhm.
they don't say function before shape. That's the strange thing. That's the strangest thing that we have.
Again, yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes.
again, right? So, but here's the thing, Ton. The reason why people say that, it's once you see it in that context, you start to see also the logic that people who truly, and that's their freedom, of course, to believe what you want. But if you believe in function before form, then you also start to believe in what's right and wrong. Does that make sense,
Yeah,
Don? And
yes,
then you
makes sense.
talk about a
So,
correct way, right?
mhm.
And then
Yeah,
you
what
talk
it don't
about,
exist.
and then we talk about certainty. And if we only drive for certainty, you rule out every mystery and discovery altogether because you're looking for one thing. And that, without really defining it in our younger years, is something that was not very settling for Ton and me. I said that cannot be. I mean, if I look at Ton and me, we could maybe be whatever you think of our dancing, but we are definitely have different forms already, right? And we see people dancing in wheelchairs, and we see dancing people with one leg. We see dancing, people with two people and with three people. It's too complex to immediately say function before form. Plus, if we create, Ton and I, we seldomly reason from a function point of view. We reason from a form point of view. What is it that we want to create? And if you follow, even in those more traditional dances choreography, how they are trained, they always reason is it what is it that you want to create? So
Mhm.
that's the reason why we thought, yeah, there is a place for function before form, absolutely. But it's just a
Yes,
place. It's not the goal.
Sean, when I go to create, I think how we come from form to form, from
Hmm.
A to B.
Yeah.
And actually, how all these messages, I will do this later. I put it out. That's life. That's nice. You create art and you think and feel, in my way, from the formless. I would not say shapeless, formless.
Yeah, formless,
In
yeah.
my formless. And I go from form A, I departure and arrive in form B. But
Yeah.
form B gets my new departure to form B again. So the B gets a A, and then I travel again to B. My B gets a new beginning at that form, and continues. And I go from, you could say, like a thread with pearls on it, or gemstones, even more nicer, Sean.
Yeah.
And you go from gemstone to gemstone, and the connection is the thread to it. And the thread makes it really interesting how to come there, the pathway. We did it already in the previous podcast, geometric or organic pathways, and how we come from gem to gem in the, say, in a different form. Think about the formless, and it is formless, and it gets a different art. And the art where you in arrive, the art is also where you in departure. And for me, this is really beautiful because I understand that. But it takes a while to get this in the 10 body parts, this transition of theory to practice for some people, because they used to do between forms, and we call it form retention and form break and form blending.
Blending.
So form blending and form blending you can break. So the break is actually not the connection of the thread, what goes from gem to gem, because it gets a hole in it and it's not continuous. And we try to find that each body part goes from departure to arrival, and arrival get a new departure. And this is the most way how we see it. I don't want to use the natural way because there isn't a natural way.
Yeah.
There is also
Yeah.
there is only a way from A to
Yeah.
B.
Yeah. So in here you come to, so our the circle is round in this case, and you can decide whether that's a form or shape, but we'll come to that later. But the word form is very connected to the word morph. And that's the interesting part of what Ton just described, because we so what people sometimes try to do, they try to make a picture and then a next picture, and don't, it's an assumption, but they might not think how you go from one picture to the other picture. And that's where the word morph comes in. There is always a form. There is no never not a form. But what Ton described with form break and blending, and or keeping the form, is interesting, because we see a lot of form break. They literally create pictures, and there is almost like not really a lot of notion. If you talk to dancers, they don't, yeah, have notions how they go from one point to the other. Now, so that's the interesting part, is that form, the word form, is connected to the word morph. And when you change your form consciously to another, you could use the word blending, but that's where morph also comes in. Don't know if you did know that, but I'm just giving you that those two words from a etymological point of view are deeply connected. Yeah, and
Yes.
morph is a Greek word, and forma was a Latin word. So those two things already indicate that you can never be without form. But how conscious are you going from one form to the other form? And that has
Mhm.
to do with, do you break the form unconsciously? You drop your arms, for instance, and then build it up again to a new form. Or
Yeah.
did you have an idea how you want to go from one form to the other form?
Yeah. You morph from A to
Yes,
B.
that would be another
And
way to say it. Yeah.
maybe you can look where the word blend is coming from,
Yeah,
Sean.
that would be another question. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a question for myself now, because I use blending and morphing, of course, to know the difference. That would be also be really nice. And I wanted to say you have a singular form and you have a composed form. And a singular form could be a form from one material and one is a particular form, like a square. Then you have a singular form with a singular material. With dancing, that would be a singular form. You could try to make a circle, like I do with my fingers, but still, when I put like this, it's super, then it looks straight, but still made by composed straight lines and from two fingers. And then it assumes it will be a circle, but still, if you look to the upper part of my good from the fingers, then you see a circle. So that's a single form then, but built by composed straight lines.
Yeah, very nice. And if you change that form tone, which you then could,
When I change, I extend it or stretch it.
yeah,
Or the form, when I rotate and I keep it together, it's still the same form. So the form will not change, only the perspective will change.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we were in a lot of the words today. So in the meantime, I looked up where the word blending is coming from. And it's called
Mhm.
from the Old English blenden, which means to
Mm.
mix or confuse, which is interesting. And it comes also from Pro-Germanic blandijan. I probably don't pronounce it correctly, which also means to mix, but in modern English it refers to mixing different substances or elements. In this case it could be forms or shapes, so you want. But of course in the gem we refer to the dynamic process of transitioning from one form to another form, right?
Yes.
That's how we
We
use it
more.
in the gem. And I think actually we mentioned the word morph, and because that's used in hip hop too, morph. But we could actually add that word to this context, morph,
Yes, I
for a
have.
next edition.
Yes, next edition of my book. I
Yeah,
have now blending and form in it.
yeah.
So I will throw the blending out, but still, you can use blending
Oh yeah, no,
also,
I
or
like I
more,
like it. But
or
there
more.
you see, people, that's actually a good demonstration of what Ton and I try to do. We come to a conclusion at some point in time and then we write it down, but we never stop there. We never say that's absolutely, this is now the absolute truth and nothing. Well, no, and if there is something, Ton did something I think really special, is a little bit outside the context of what we talked about. He said, "Oh, maybe is blending, morph is a better word than blending. Maybe we should change that." It's not like, no, I'm using blending and I keep using it blending. So that is when people started to defend things like function before form. It doesn't give a lot of questions to make that a little bit, exciting. Or when I gave that example about using the word figure, it's not to prove someone right or wrong. It is different. Can you look at it from a different perspective? And it's really okay if you have to adjust your opinion, or, that's, I think that's what it is. For us, for Ton and me, dance is also, has become also a topic of research. We kind of,
I
we
believe
can spend
so.
hours talking about researching and not to find the absolute truth. Not at all. Not at all. And that's actually what we would like you to stimulate too. If you use these words, form, shape, and design, go read Gem about it, but read also other books about it. How do they use it? And then come back to us if you want to with your opinion, right? Because are often used, these words are often used without giving it context. And that for Ton and me has always been, in our younger years, a little bit like, but, don't want to be, but I don't understand. That's all it is, Ton.
Yeah, in all these years, I did my research from the World Wide Web,
Yeah.
and in my books, what are behind me, and not from podcast. At that time, podcast wasn't there. 17 years ago, maybe there was a podcast, but I didn't know about it. And also now you have ChatGPT also that helps also. So from the World Wide Web, etc., etc. and you get new insights of it. So I'm quite happy to understand the words form, forma, shape, design, blending, morphing. And this is the beauty of it if you understand it and you have context to it. So I use only a word when I understand the context and the story from it and where it comes from it. And that makes a logical connection in my 86 neurons here. And this connection makes it more logical for myself to come to that conclusion why we use these words. And we will not limit it, the people, how they use the words. But if they have no context to it, then it gets a little bit challenging for me to understand why they use it without context.
Yeah, and to be really honest, also for me, the believability is then also very thin. I was listening this morning and had something to do with shape and form. That's why I think it's very
Hmm.
relevant. There is still this discussion that the shape, we should actually say the form of the Earth is flat, and it's actually a relatively large group of people, and it's growing, but none of these people can come up with some simple reasoning to prove what they do. So the believability of that statement, if you make a statement, at least try to give the context in which in how you make that statement, and if possible, at least the arguments that you found to support what you say. Doesn't mean that's the ultimate thing, right? So therefore you see Ton and me still looking for, can we describe it better? Is it maybe, can we do it different? Sometimes we get a whole different context by opening new books and think, oh, maybe we need to revisit what we said before. Nothing wrong with that. Makes us grow.
No,
Makes us grow.
that,
So
yeah,
yeah, makes us
and
grow.
the development goes and let us grow. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
actually our purpose to grow.
yeah,
If we stand still, where's the growing? Where's the development then? So
yeah. That
try
becomes
to
static, and that comes connects directly to those three words: form, design, and shape.
try to break in your head the stacking or the fixed form.
Yeah, the fixed form, the
So
static form,
yeah, the
because it
static form.
never ever can be static. There is no
No,
way. You can, in our words, we can stand still, but we literally never stand still. It's an
no,
impossibility. It's an impossibility. In words, we
we
say
use that
stand
word.
still, but you can never stand still because it's always in reference to what? First of all,
Yes,
the earth is constantly moving, so you move no matter what you do. Oh yeah, but
yes,
that's not what I mean. That's why you need to give context.
yes, yes, yes.
That's why you need to give
But
context.
to
Cool.
understand it with the talking, the chatting between us two, between form, shape, and design, that makes it more value. And for myself,
Yeah.
what I wrote down in my book, that's fantastic. But also the podcast gives more value to it to understand what form, shape, and design meant. But hopefully you could think about it, consider about it, but don't believe us, don't trust us, do your own research, and then you come also to a conclusion.
Yes, exactly, Ton. Um, exactly. Unravel the mystery of dance with us, and you can only have mystery if there is no certainty. You have to think about that. If there is certainty, the mystery is gone. And dance has a lot of mystery still for Ton and me to explore, and hopefully for you too. That is our life's works and our passion. But that also concludes this episode of the Dance Jams, which was all about form, shape, and design. Ton, what about that?
Yes, yes, I forgot to tell something about design. It has more elements. I didn't tell that. I forgot to tell that, Sean.
Yeah,
We have the elements of singular and composed.
yeah,
We have
yeah.
the symmetry, asymmetry, and we have the geometry and organic, and that belongs also inside these tools, this element. in the design.
Yeah, no, I believe you. I'm not sure if we can leave our listeners with that, but it makes them maybe curious to even go back to the other episodes where we talked about these things, and or listen to our future episodes where we talk more about these things. Yeah.
Yes.
With that, I'll say goodbye to you, Ton, and I'll hope to hear you soon in another episode of Dance Gems.
Yes, Sean. Thank you very much.
Of
And
course.
we see each other soon again.
We see each other soon again. This was Form and Shape and Design in Dance with Ton Greten and the Dance Gems. My name is Sean Dorff, of course, but you knew that already. Let's start the music and tell everyone where they can listen to us. Right, you probably already listening to us when you hear this, but if you look for other places to listen to us, we are to be found at Spotify Dance Dash Jams, Apple Dance Dash Jams, YouTube at Tom Greten /podcast, of course on our website www.jam.dance/podcast, and last but not least, we have our own Facebook group, The Dance Jams. And with that, I say to you, bye bye, Ton.
Goodbye.